Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
The bustling streets of Manhattan on a crisp October morning in 2023. The city hums with its usual symphony of ambition and urgency, where fortunes are made and lost in the span of a heartbeat. Among the towering glass monuments to capitalism stands the headquarters of Meridian Oil Corporation, a gleaming testament to one woman's iron will and relentless determination. Bianca Meridian, at 58, commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe. Her silver hair, always immaculately styled in a sharp bob, caught the morning light filtering through her corner office windows. She wore power like a perfectly tailored suit, comfortable, commanding, and utterly uncompromising. For 35 years, she had built her empire from the ground up, transforming a small regional oil company into an international conglomerate worth billions. But success, as Bianca had learned the hard way, came with a price. 3 years earlier, she had buried her husband of 26 years, a man who had been her anchor in the tempestuous waters of corporate America. Margaret Maggie, to her friends, had been the only person who could make Bianca laugh until her sides ached, the only one who could convince her to leave work early for impromptu weekend getaways to their cottage in the Hamptons. Since Maggie's death from cancer, Bianca's world had contracted to the familiar confines of her office, her penthouse apartment, and the occasional charity gala where her presence was expected. Love, she had convinced herself, was a luxury she could no longer afford. At 58, she reasoned, such chapters were meant to remain closed. Meanwhile, across town in a cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, 23-year-old Charlotte Webb was discovering that idealism often collides headfirst with reality. A recent graduate from Columbia Law School, Charlotte possessed the kind of fierce intelligence that crackled in her green eyes like electricity. Her auburn hair fell in waves past her shoulders, often hastily pulled back when she was deep in thought or preparing for court. Charlotte had dedicated her young career to environmental law, driven by a passion that burned as bright as her determination to make a difference. She worked for the Environmental Protection Alliance, a nonprofit organization that often found itself David to the oil industry's Goliath. Her colleagues admired her tenacity, her ability to find legal precedents in the most obscure cases, and her unwavering belief that corporate giants could be held accountable for their environmental transgressions. It was this very conviction that had led Charlotte to spend countless hours building a case against Meridian Oil Corporation. For months, she had been investigating allegations of environmental violations at several of their drilling sites. Allegations that, if proven, could result in millions of dollars in fines and force the company to completely overhaul their operations. Fate, however, has a peculiar sense of timing and an even more peculiar sense of humor. On that October morning, both women found themselves drawn to the same small antique shop in Greenwich Village, a dusty treasure trove called Memories and More, that had somehow survived the relentless gentrification of the neighborhood. Bianca had wandered in during a rare lunch break, searching for a vintage fountain pen to replace one that Maggie had given her years ago, a pen she had recently lost during a business trip. Charlotte, meanwhile, was hunting for a particular law book, a first edition that her grandfather, himself a lawyer, had once owned and that she hoped to find as a surprise for her mother's upcoming birthday. The shop was narrow and deep, filled with the comfortable mustiness of old books and forgotten memories. Shelves lined every available surface, crammed with everything from Victorian jewelry to mid-century modern furniture. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move differently, where the outside world faded in significance. Bianca was examining a beautiful mother-of-pearl fountain pen when she heard a soft voice behind her say, "That's a beautiful piece." Probably 1920s, judging by the Art Deco styling. She turned to find a young woman with remarkable green eyes and an intelligent face that seemed vaguely familiar, though Bianca couldn't place where she might have seen her before. The young woman was holding what appeared to be an old leather-bound legal tome. "You have a good eye," Bianca replied, her voice carrying the confident timbre that had commanded countless boardroom meetings. "Are you a collector?" Charlotte smiled, an expression that transformed her serious face into something radiant. "Not really. I just appreciate beautiful craftsmanship. I'm actually looking for something quite different, a law book that belonged to my grandfather." "A lawyer?" I'm trying to follow in his footsteps, though I suspect he'd have some strong opinions about the cases I choose to take on. There was something in the young woman's tone, a hint of mischief mixed with determination, that intrigued Bianca. Oh, what kind of law do you practice? Environmental law. I work for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Alliance, not the government agency. We specialize in holding corporations accountable for environmental damage. A chill ran down Bianca's spine, though she maintained her composure. That sounds like challenging work. It is. Actually, I'm currently working on a major case against an oil company. It's taken months to build, but I think we have them dead to rights. Bianca felt her stomach tighten. Which company? Charlotte's eyes sparked with the fervor of someone who had found her life's purpose. Meridian Oil Corporation. Have you heard of them? Their CEO is this woman who thinks she's untouchable, Bianca Meridian. Word is she's brilliant, but completely ruthless when it comes to environmental issues. No conscience whatsoever. The words hit Bianca like a physical blow, though years of corporate negotiations had taught her to mask her reactions. She managed a neutral smile. I've heard the name. Sorry, I don't usually get so passionate about work with strangers. I'm Charlotte, by the way. Charlotte Webb. Bianca, she replied, offering her hand and choosing, in that moment, to omit her surname. Charlotte's handshake was firm, confident, the handshake of someone who had learned early to command respect in rooms full of older, more experienced men. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Bianca's system, a sensation she hadn't experienced since Maggie's death. Well, Bianca, it was lovely meeting you. I hope you find what you're looking for. As Charlotte moved toward the back of the shop, Bianca found herself watching the young woman's graceful movements, the way she handled the old books with reverence. The concentrated expression crossed her face as she searched. For a moment, she forgot entirely about the fountain pen in her hand. Found it. Charlotte's delighted exclamation echoed through the shop. She emerged from between two towering bookcases, holding a leather-bound volume with obvious satisfaction. Third edition of Blackstone's Environmental Precedents. Grandpa Joe would be so proud. Your grandfather would approve of your current work? Bianca asked, genuinely curious. Charlotte's expression grew thoughtful. I think so. He always said that the law should protect those who can't protect themselves, and right now, that includes our planet. He used to tell me that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with swords, but with words carefully chosen and precisely placed. Wise man, he was. He also said that you should never underestimate your opponent, but you should never let them underestimate you either. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither woman fully grasped in that moment. Bianca purchased the fountain pen, Charlotte bought her book, and they parted ways with polite smiles and well wishes, but fate wasn't finished with them yet. 3 days later, Bianca sat in conference room A of Meridian Oil's legal department, surrounded by a team of the most expensive lawyers money could buy. The long mahogany table was covered with documents, depositions, and legal briefs, all related to the environmental lawsuit that had been filed against the company. The plaintiff's attorney is young, but she's good, reported James Harrison, Meridian's head of legal affairs. Charlotte Webb, 23 years old, top of her class at Columbia. She's been building this case for 8 months, and frankly, she's found some things we'd rather she hadn't. Bianca's blood ran cold as James continued his briefing, but she maintained her CEO composure. What kind of things? Internal emails from 2019 regarding the Alaska drilling operation. Soil contamination reports that somehow never made it to the EPA. A few other items that could be ... problematic. How problematic? Potentially hundreds of millions in fines. Forced operational shutdowns, congressional hearings. The kind of media attention that could destroy our stock price and trigger a complete corporate restructuring. Bianca absorbed this information with the same stoic expression she had perfected over decades of corporate crises. Inside, however, her mind was racing. The passionate young woman from the antique shop, the one who had spoken so eloquently about holding corporations accountable, was the same person who now threatened everything Bianca had spent her lifetime building. When do I meet her? Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Here in this conference room. That evening, Bianca stood in her penthouse apartment, staring out at the glittering lights of Manhattan spread below her like a constellation of ambitions and dreams. A glass of wine sat untouched on the table beside her, a bottle of the Bordeaux. that she and Maggie had been saving for a special occasion that had never come. For the first time in years, Bianca found herself thinking about something other than quarterly reports and profit margins. She thought about green eyes that sparkled with passion, about a handshake that had sent electricity through her veins, about a voice that spoke of justice with the fervor of a true believer. She thought about how Charlotte's face had transformed. When she smiled, the next afternoon arrived with all the inevitability of a tidal wave. Bianca sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by her legal team, as Charlotte Webb entered the room with her own small group of attorneys from the Environmental Protection Alliance. The moment their eyes met across the polished mahogany, Bianca saw the exact instant when Charlotte realized who she was. The young woman's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally, a kind of betrayed anger that cut through Bianca more sharply than any hostile takeover bid ever had. "Ms. Meridian," Charlotte said, her voice carefully controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of something that might have been hurt. "How unexpected to see you again." "Ms. Webb," Bianca replied with equal formality, though every instinct screamed at her to explain, to apologize, to somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between them in the space of a heartbeat. What followed was 3 hours of the most professionally brutal legal maneuvering Bianca had ever witnessed. Charlotte presented her case with surgical precision, dismantling Meridian Oil's environmental record with a combination of documented evidence and legal precedent that was both impressive and devastating. But it wasn't Charlotte's professional competence that captivated Bianca. It was the way her eyes blazed when she spoke about contaminated groundwater affecting rural communities, the way her voice carried genuine anguish when she described wildlife habitats destroyed by oil spills, the way her hands moved expressively as she painted a picture of corporate irresponsibility that cut uncomfortably close to the truth. Bianca found herself in the unprecedented position of being simultaneously professionally threatened and personally mesmerized by the same individual. When the meeting concluded with plans for further negotiations, Charlotte packed her materials with brisk efficiency, clearly intending to make a quick exit. Bianca made a decision that surprised even herself. "Ms. Webb, might I have a word, privately?" Charlotte's colleagues exchanged glances, but she nodded curtly. 5 minutes. When the conference room had emptied, leaving them alone with the lingering tension of legal warfare, Bianca struggled to find words that had never seemed necessary in boardroom negotiations. "I should have told you who I was." "Yes, you should have." Charlotte's voice was clipped, professional. "Although I suppose it was enlightening to hear your honest opinion of my character. That WASN single quotes T. I didn't know you then, and now you do." Bianca met her gaze directly. "I know that you believe passionately in what you're doing. I know that you're incredibly talented at it. And I know that this case isn't just about legal precedent for you, it's personal." Charlotte's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Everything worthwhile is personal, Ms. Meridian. The question is whether you're willing to acknowledge that what your company has done is wrong." "It's complicated." "No, it's really not." Charlotte closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. "You either care about the environmental damage you've caused, or you don't. You either take responsibility for your company's actions, or you hide behind expensive lawyers and corporate legal shields. And which do you think I'm doing?" For a long moment, Charlotte studied her with those remarkable green eyes, and Bianca had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly evaluated by someone who saw far more than most people bothered to look. "I'm not sure," Charlotte said finally. "The woman I met in that antique shop seemed like someone who might care. The CEO sitting across from me this afternoon. I'm less convinced." With that, she left, leaving Bianca alone with the echoes of her words and a growing realization that this case had become about much more than corporate liability. Over the following weeks, Bianca found herself doing something unprecedented. She began personally reviewing every piece of evidence Charlotte had presented. Not just the legal implications, but the actual environmental impact reports, the photos of damaged ecosystems, the testimonials from affected communities. For 35 years, she had insulated herself from the messy realities of oil extraction by focusing on quarterly profits and shareholder returns. She had told herself that environmental regulations were the government's responsibility, that her job was to maximize value for investors while staying within the bounds of legal compliance. But Charlotte's evidence painted a different picture, one where legal compliance and moral responsibility occupied entirely different territories. The Alaska drilling operation had indeed contaminated groundwater that supplied 3 rural communities. The Louisiana refinery had released chemicals that had measurably impacted local wildlife populations. The Texas pipeline had leaked crude oil into a river system that supported both commercial fishing and recreational boating, all technically within legal parameters due to regulatory loopholes and environmental impact exemptions, all completely devastating to the communities and ecosystems involved. Blanca began having dreams about green eyes filled with disappointment. Meanwhile, Charlotte was experiencing her own professional crisis. She had expected to feel triumphant about finally confronting Bianca Meridian in person, about laying out the evidence of corporate irresponsibility with courtroom precision. Instead, she found herself thinking about the woman in the antique shop who had admired craftsmanship and asked thoughtful questions. She thought about the way Bianca's eyes had softened when Charlotte mentioned her grandfather, about the genuine interest she had shown in Charlotte's work before learning what that work entailed. She thought about the moment of recognition in the conference room, when she had seen something that looked almost like regret cross Bianca's face. "You're distracted," observed Marcus Rodriguez, Charlotte's colleague and closest friend at the EPA. "This case has consumed your life for 8 months, and now that we finally have them on the ropes, you seem conflicted." They were sitting in their favorite coffee shop near the office, surrounded by the comfortable buzz of laptop keyboards and whispered conversations. Charlotte stirred her latte absently, her mind clearly elsewhere. "I'm not conflicted about the case," she said finally. "The evidence is solid. They're legally responsible for significant environmental damage, and they should be held accountable. But that I met her before I knew who she was. And she wasn't what I expected." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "She wasn't a mustache-twirling corporate villain. She was human, intelligent, interesting. She seemed genuinely curious about my work, genuinely interested in my perspective. Charlotte, you know that corporate executives are trained to be charming, right? It's part of their job description. I know. But this felt different, more authentic. Or she's just better at it than most." Charlotte sipped her coffee, considering this possibility. Maybe, but what if she's not? What if there's more to this situation than just corporate greed versus environmental protection? "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, people are capable of changing, of growing, of recognizing when they've made mistakes and wanting to do better." Marcus looked concerned. "Charlotte, please tell me you're not developing feelings for the opposing counsel." The question hit closer to home than Charlotte wanted to admit. Over the past weeks, she had found herself thinking about Bianca Meridian far more than professional necessity required. She thought about her silver hair catching the light, about the way her voice carried authority without arrogance, about the momentary vulnerability she had glimpsed when Bianca realized Charlotte's identity in the conference room. "It's not about feelings," Charlotte said, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "It's about believing that people can change, that justice doesn't always have to be punitive. Sometimes it can be restorative. And sometimes," Marcus said gently, "it's about recognizing when you're being manipulated by someone who has everything to lose and the resources to make you want to save them." Charlotte knew Marcus was probably right. She also knew that her feelings about Bianca Meridian had become far more complicated than any legal case should allow. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later in the form of a phone call that Charlotte never expected to receive. "Ms. Webb, this is Bianca Meridian. I was wondering if you might be available to meet, not as opposing counsel, but as two people who might have more in common than they initially realized." Charlotte's heart rate accelerated in a way that had nothing to do with legal strategy. "What kind of meeting?" "Dinner, perhaps, somewhere neutral. I have a proposal that I think might interest you." "What kind of proposal?" "The kind that might actually solve the problems you're trying to address, rather than simply punishing the people who created them." They met at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, the kind of place that had been serving the same recipes for 3 generations and where the lighting was soft enough to have actual conversations. Bianca arrived first, having chosen a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. When Charlotte walked in, Bianca felt her breath catch in her throat. The young woman had dressed simply a forest green sweater that brought out her eyes, dark jeans, minimal makeup. She looked younger than her 23 years, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her right to occupy any space she entered. "Thank you for coming," Bianca said as Charlotte took the seat across from her. "I almost didn't." "Marcus thinks you're going to try to manipulate me into dropping the lawsuit." "Marcus?" My colleague, my friend, the voice of reason when I'm in danger of letting my emotions cloud my judgment. And are you in danger of that? Charlotte met her gaze directly. I don't know yet. What's your proposal? Bianca had spent days preparing for this conversation, but now, faced with Charlotte's unwavering green eyes, her carefully rehearsed corporate pitch seemed insufficient. What if, instead of fighting this in court for the next 2 years, while environmental damage continues, we found a way to actually fix the problems you've identified? I'm listening. A complete overhaul of Meridian Oil's environmental protocols, third-party oversight of all operations, $100 million fund for environmental restoration in affected areas, community compensation packages that go far beyond legal requirements. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, processing this information, and in return, we settle out of court. No admission of legal wrongdoing, but complete acknowledgement of moral responsibility and a commitment to doing better. Why? The simple question cut to the heart of everything Bianca had been wrestling with for weeks. Because you were right. Because legal compliance and ethical responsibility aren't the same thing. Because I've spent 35 years building a company without fully considering the cost of that success. And because fighting me in court would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of a favorable outcome. That too, Bianca admitted. But mostly because I've looked at every piece of evidence you presented, and I can't argue with your conclusions. We did cause environmental damage. We should take responsibility for fixing it. Charlotte studied her for a long moment. This is quite a change from the woman who was described to me as utterly ruthless when it comes to environmental issues. People change. At least some people do, given the right motivation. And what was your motivation? Bianca hesitated, then decided. On honesty, initially? Avoiding a legal battle that would be costly and damaging regardless of the outcome. But then I started actually reading the evidence instead of just reviewing the legal briefs. I saw the photographs of contaminated groundwater. I read the testimonials from affected families. I looked at the wildlife impact studies. She paused, gathering her thoughts. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could rationalize environmental damage as acceptable collateral damage for corporate success. What changed? Meeting you. Hearing you talk about your grandfather's belief that the law should protect those who can't protect themselves. Seeing someone who still believes that individual actions can make a difference. Charlotte felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant's ambient lighting. And you think you can make a difference? I'd like to try. With your help. My help. Bianca leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. I want to hire you as an environmental consultant to oversee Meridian Oil's transformation into a company that actually deserves to operate in the 21st century. You want me to work for you? I want us to work together. To prove that corporate responsibility and environmental protection don't have to be mutually exclusive. Charlotte was quiet for a long time, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. My colleagues would think I'd lost my mind, or that you'd somehow bought me off. What would you think? I'd think it's the kind of opportunity my grandfather would have told me to take. The chance to actually implement change instead of just fighting for it. Is that a yes? Charlotte smiled, the same radiant expression that had captivated Bianca in the antique shop weeks earlier. It's a maybe. I'll need to see the specifics of your proposal. Full environmental audits, third-party oversight, transparent reporting, community involvement in restoration. Planning. Done. And I maintain the right to publicize any backsliding or failure to meet agreed-upon standards. Agreed. And I want to understand why this is so important to you. Not the corporate reasons, but the personal ones. Bianca signaled for another bottle of wine, settling in for what she sensed would be a longer conversation than either of them had initially planned. 3 years ago, my wife died of cancer. Maggie, she was everything good in my life. Kind, funny, idealistic in ways that I had forgotten how to be. Charlotte's expression softened. I'm sorry. She used to tease me about my work. She'd say that I was so focused on building an empire that I was forgetting to live in the world I was helping to shape. She wanted us to travel more, to spend time in places that weren't boardrooms or benefit galas. Bianca paused, lost in memory. The last conversation we had before she got too sick to really talk was about legacy. What? we leave behind. She said that companies are just collections of individual choices, and that every day I was choosing what kind of legacy Meridian Oil would have. What kind of legacy do you want? One that would make her proud. One that would prove that successful businesses can also be responsible corporate citizens. Charlotte reached across the table and touched Bianca's hand, a gesture of comfort that sent warmth shooting up her arm. She sounds like she was an amazing person. She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always admired people who fought for things they believed in, even when those things threatened your company, especially then. She used to say that opposition was just an invitation to do better. They talked until the restaurant began emptying around them, their conversation ranging from environmental policy to personal history, from corporate ethics to family traditions. Charlotte learned that Bianca had grown up in rural Colorado, the daughter of a small-town bank manager who had taught her that success without integrity was just another form of failure. Bianca discovered that Charlotte's passion for environmental law had been sparked by a childhood spent exploring the forests of upstate New York with her grandfather, who had taught her that the natural world was a trust that each generation held. For the next dot, when they finally parted ways outside the restaurant, both women felt the weight of possibility, professional and personal, settling between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Over the following months, Charlotte found herself spending increasing amounts of time at Meridian Oil's headquarters, working with Bianca to implement the most comprehensive environmental overhaul in the company's history. The work was challenging, occasionally frustrating, and absolutely fascinating. Bianca, meanwhile, discovered that having Charlotte as a consultant was like viewing her own company through a completely different lens. The young woman's environmental expertise was matched by her ability to ask questions that no one else had thought to ask, to identify problems that had been hiding in plain sight for years, to propose solutions that were both practical and innovative. But beyond the professional collaboration, something else was developing, a connection that neither woman had expected or initially welcomed. It began with small moments. The way Bianca's face would light up when Charlotte entered her office with a new idea. The way Charlotte found herself lingering after meetings, reluctant to return to her own work. The casual touches that became more frequent, a hand on a shoulder during a difficult conversation, fingers brushing as they reached for the same document, the increasing tendency to stand closer together when reviewing environmental reports. First time Bianca laughed, really laughed, with the kind of full-body joy she hadn't experienced since Maggie's death. Charlotte felt something shift permanently in her chest. They had been reviewing a particularly absurd regulatory filing when Bianca had made a dry comment about bureaucratic language, and Charlotte had responded with an even more ridiculous example from her law school days. The sound of Bianca's laughter was like music Charlotte hadn't realized she'd been waiting to hear. "You have a beautiful laugh," she said without thinking, then immediately felt heat rise in her cheeks. Bianca's laughter faded into something softer, more wondering. "I'd forgotten that I did. Laugh, I mean. Why? Grief, I suppose. When Maggie died, it felt wrong to find joy in anything. Like I was betraying her memory by continuing to experience pleasure. Do you think she would have wanted that, for you to stop laughing?" "No," Bianca said quietly. "She would have been furious with me for wasting 3 years being unnecessarily miserable. Then maybe it's time to stop." Their eyes met and held, and in that moment, both women recognized that they had crossed some invisible line from which there would be no easy retreat. The shift in their relationship became impossible to ignore. When Charlotte accompanied Bianca to a site visit in Louisiana, where Meridian Oil was implementing one of their new environmental restoration projects, they spent 2 days touring affected areas, meeting with local community leaders, and observing the early stages of ecosystem rehabilitation. On their second evening, they found themselves sharing dinner at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and the warm breeze carried the scent of salt water and possibility. "This is beautiful," Charlotte said, watching pelicans dive for fish in the shallow water. "Near shore, it is now. You should have seen it 2 years ago, before we started the cleanup." Charlotte turned to look at her. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished here. We've accomplished. This wouldn't have happened without your expertise and your insistence on community involvement. Your company, your resources, your decision to do the right thing, even when it was expensive and complicated." They were quiet for a moment, both lost in contemplation of the restored landscape spread before them. Then Bianca said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" about second chances, about whether it's possible to completely redirect your life when you're 58 years old. Charlotte's pulse quickened. What kind of redirection are you thinking about? The kind that involves admitting that working with you has become the most meaningful part of my life. The kind that acknowledges that I look forward to seeing you every day in ways that have nothing to do with environmental consulting. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications and possibilities that both exhilarated and terrified Charlotte. Bianca dot dot. I know. I know it's complicated. The age difference, the professional relationship, the fact that you probably think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. Are you? Bianca considered this seriously. Possibly. But if I am, it's the best crisis I've ever had. Charlotte laughed despite herself. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. What I mean is that for the first time in 3 years, I feel alive. Really alive, and that's because of you. Charlotte felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Bianca, I need you to understand something. I care about you. More than I should, probably. But I also need to know that this isn't just about you. Processing grief, or rebelling against your old life, or finding a way to make yourself feel better about past corporate decisions. And if it's not, if it's about recognizing that I've met someone who challenges me intellectually, inspires me professionally, and makes me remember what it feels like to want something more than quarterly profit reports, then I'd say you're not the only one having a crisis. They looked at each other across the small table, both acutely aware that they were standing at a crossroads that would determine not just their personal futures, but their professional relationship and everything they had worked to build together. What do we do? Bianca asked quietly. I don't know. This isn't exactly covered in law school, business school either. Charlotte reached across the table and took Bianca's hand, marveling at how perfectly their fingers fit together. I think we take it slow. I think we figure out how to navigate this without compromising the work we're doing. And if we can't, if personal feelings interfere with professional responsibilities, then we deal with that when it happens. But right now, I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been possible. Bianca brought Charlotte's hand to her lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I haven't felt hopeful about the future in a very long time. How do you feel now? Terrified, exhilarated, like I'm 23 again and everything is possible. You know, I actually am 23, right? I'm aware. Does it bother you? The age gap? Charlotte considered this. It would bother me if I thought you saw me as some kind of midlife adventure, or if you were trying to recapture your youth through me. But that's not what this feels like. What does it feel like? Like two adults who happen to have been born 35 years apart, who found something rare and worth exploring. They returned to New York as something more than colleagues, but not yet ready to define exactly what they were becoming. The transition was delicate, requiring them to navigate new boundaries while maintaining their professional collaboration. Charlotte continued her consulting work with Meridian Oil, but now their meetings were punctuated with lingering glances and careful touches. They began having dinner together regularly, conversations that ranged from environmental policy to personal history, from favorite books to childhood memories. Bianca introduced Charlotte to her world, gradually art gallery openings, charity, benefits, intimate dinners with longtime friends who were initially surprised by the presence of someone so young, but who quickly recognized the intelligence and passion that had captivated their hostess. Charlotte, meanwhile, brought Bianca into her circle of young environmental lawyers and activists, a group that was initially suspicious of any corporate executive, but gradually warmed to Bianca's genuine commitment to environmental reform and her obvious devotion to Charlotte. The first time they kissed was 3 months after that dinner in Louisiana. They were working late in Bianca's office, reviewing environmental impact assessments, when Charlotte looked up to find Bianca watching her with an expression of such tender affection that it took her breath away. What? Charlotte asked softly. I was just thinking about how much my life has changed in the past year, how much you've changed it. Charlotte set down her pen and moved around the desk to where Bianca was sitting. Better or worse? Immeasurably better. Complicated, but better. Charlotte placed her hands on either side of Bianca's face, her thumbs tracing the elegant cheekbones that had become so dear to her. I love you. I love you too, Bianca whispered, and then they were kissing with the kind of desperate passion that had been building between them for months. It was Charlotte who pulled away first, both of them breathing heavily. We should probably talk about what this means. It means that I'm completely, irrevocably in love with a brilliant, passionate, beautiful woman who also happens to be the best environmental consultant I've ever worked with. And it means that I'm in love with a woman who's brave enough to completely transform her life and her company because it's the right thing to do. So, what do we do now? Now, Charlotte said, settling into Bianca's lap with a smile that was pure joy, we figure out how to build something beautiful together. Their relationship developed in layers, like a photograph slowly coming into focus. There were challenges, Charlotte's friends who worried she was being taken advantage of by an older, more powerful woman. Bianca's colleagues who questioned whether their CEO was making sound business decisions or simply trying to impress her younger lover. But love, as they discovered, has a way of proving itself through actions rather than words. Over the course of 2 years, Meridian Oil became industry leader in environmental responsibility. Charlotte's innovative restoration programs were implemented across all company operations. The communities once affected by Meridian's negligence became partners in sustainable development initiatives. On a crisp October morning, exactly 3 years after their first meeting in that dusty antique shop, Bianca and Charlotte stood together at the dedication ceremony for the Maggie Meridian Environmental Research Center, a facility that would train the next generation of environmental scientists and corporate sustainability experts. She would have loved this, Bianca said quietly, watching Charlotte address the gathered crowd with the same passion that had first captivated her. Charlotte found her in the crowd, smiled, and concluded her speech with words that seemed meant for Bianca alone. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the courage to see each other, really see each other across whatever divides us. In the end, their love story became something larger than either of them had imagined, proof that change is possible, that love can bloom at any age, and that the most unexpected encounters can reshape not just two hearts, but the world around them.